Hi, this is Jonah Andersson, and welcome to Azure Back to School. Today is the 13th of September, 2023, and this is my first session of two for the month of September for this event. And first of all, I would like to thank you for clicking on play or going on to the link shared to you today to watch this session about minimal APIs in .NET. And of course, it is actually my birthday today, so I feel very happy to give back to the community by sharing knowledge about this topic that I will be talking with you. So, minimal APIs in .NET and Azure API management is our focus in the next 40 to 60 minutes. It depends on how long it will take us to accomplish what we need to do, but that is our goal today. So, let me see. My clicker is actually low bat almost, but I think it's working. Let's see. So, our goal today is actually a summary of not all the hearts, which matches my shirt today, but it's actually the heart represents my passion and my interest in this technology. So, of course, I'm a developer that you can see on the left. But I do love working or coding with .NET together with Azure, Microsoft Azure, and its technologies like Azure API management. So this is like the timeline, minimal storyline of our topics for today. So this session is going to be combined session of all these topics in .NET for minimal APIs. It's gonna discuss a bit about Azure's focus on API management. So this is not a deep dive on each of them. It's an overview of everything that you need to know to get started in developing APIs with Azure and the minimal versions of it. And I assume that some of you that tuned into this session has experience with .NET, or probably you're a beginner that really wants it's just curious about how it works in building APIs in .NET or and publish it in Azure. So thank you for like being curious as well. So I will try my best to keep this session as diverse and equal for everyone, not too much, not too little. In Sweden, we call it lagom. And I hope that by the end of the session, you will have something to carry with you to get you started and inspired to get coding. So this is our goal today. Four topics, actually not four, two main topics: minimal APIs in .NET. We're gonna learn about the Azure API management, and then I'm gonna show you an example code demo in C Sharp, show you the Azure portal, how the API management looks like when this code, example code, is being published or deployed. And I will also highlight some of the blogs that I found very interesting to share in terms of reading farther about minimal APIs and how you can use it in your real projects in .NET. And of course, learning resources, learn by doing. You will get a lot of those by the end of the session. So this is me. I'm Jonah Andersson. I have been working as a developer, focused in .NET for a while now, almost 8 years. I am based in Sweden. My day job is senior Azure consultant at Solidify, which is an IT consulting company in Sweden. And outside work as a developer or as consultant, I am a writer. So I wrote a book about Microsoft Azure, the fundamentals of how you can develop with it, And that book will be published very soon. So check it out when you are interested. And aside from that, my writing, my training as a micro about Azure and teaching is actually associated with my new company that I built on the side, and it's the Jonah Andersson Tech. Aside from work, side stuff that I do to earn money, of course, I am giving back to the community and inspiring others as a community leader of Azure User Group Sweden, where we organize bi-weekly community events about Azure. And then I also co-host a podcast that highlights women in tech and those that are still getting started in their journey and inspire them of the story of others. So I'm also a Microsoft MVP for Azure. So this is the reason why I am very passionate about this technology, not just because I'm an MVP, but because I've used the technology myself in my career experience, and I like speaking about it because I believe in its potential and power. So aside from the career wise and all the other things that I do also have a life. So if I'm not on my computer, I like traveling, uh, taking pictures, spending time with my dog, Lawrence, gardening, and playing chess, as well as capturing moments. So this is who I am outside professional arena. So minimal APIs in .NET. So what are they? So basically the word itself, minimal. So you write minimalistic minimalistic way of writing or coding API. So there are like an approach to simplify how you develop APIs in .NET, specifically ASP.NET Core web applications. And you can what you can think of minimal APIs as skipping the traditional coding that you need to do to structure the MVC pattern model view controller in .NET application for building APIs. So you skip those traditional scaffolding in building the controllers, the routes, and all the actions. So you see, as you build them, it actually gets bigger, and the line of code actually gets long. So minimal API simplifies that, and it's a minimalistic way of doing things. And this is a definition of Microsoft Learn website as of today. Probably it will be changed depending on how it will evolve, but this is the general definition of it. So I was curious what ChatGPT had to say about what is minimal APIs in .NET. So I was like, oh, it was actually a while since I chatted with the GPT because I've been too busy working and writing my book. But I did ask recently ChatGPT what it thinks about about web APIs, and this is what it said. I don't think it's correct that September 2021 was like the date when it was updated. I have to double check in that, but I know that it came on the ASP.NET Core 6. And the key points, of course, as I shared, minimalistic syntax for building APIs, less configuration, less code to set up. The routing is also similar to MVC, and then it's lightweight and it's easy to learn. And it did actually show a code example and how you would build a minimal API by code in an app. for example. So it did actually created a disclaimer that it will be updated. So the latest information is always checked on the official documentation. And here on this recording, with my chat with ChatGPT, I noticed that I actually typed very slow in asking what I wanted to prompt or asked it. But I was trying to ask ChatGPT about when I would consider using minimal APIs over the traditional MVC uh, pattern or APIs with controller. So it took time for me to write because I haven't actually actively chatted with this tool, but it was quick to respond to me. Of course, you would consider it if you want simplicity, a lightweight API. If you're building something, microservices, a small API. If you have a learning curve, if you're thinking about performance, if you want something faster, it also is ideal if you're doing a prototyping type. So if you're trying to do a prototype, learning curve is easy to learn compared to building APIs with MVC controllers. On the other hand, if you have an existing code base that has a complex architecture and you have a really complex integration, then it is actually recommended that you would use the traditional APIs with the MVC controllers. So by that case, I think ChatGPT really had a good respond to me. I was actually just testing how valid the response was, and I think it was actually pretty good answer on that side. So minimal APIs focuses on writing less code. So this is an example that you see in C Sharp, where in 4 lines of code you can build an app saying "Hello World." So instead of writing a lot of code that we're used to, we're writing less in our program that CS as well. So usually, the common that you will see here is that the builder part. So web application create builder, it also has that same method in API with controllers, because it's required to register those important components like configuration, services, routing, and the hosting. So the minimal web API or APIs are actually the history that started um, from the developer community. So Mark Rendell, I believe I have met and spoke. Met him in one of the conferences here in Sweden. I haven't really talked with him, but I recognize him. He had this tweet in 2019 where the developer community were wondering about the distributed calculator app in terms of the different languages. So the story of it started in 2019, and the developer community are trying uh, to compare how many files and lines of code were uh, were created in uh, different languages like Go, C Sharp, and Python. And they noticed that when the community started comparing how many files and lines of codes are needed to do almost the same thing with C sharp compared to other languages, it was apparent that C sharp seems to be more complicated than the rest of them. So this was a quote actually from a source, a blog source for codemaze.com. So if you're going to search about the history of minimal API, you will actually see this. And it all started in the version .NET 6. at that time, so you can read more about it if you're curious how it all started. So it's from the developer company community. It all started with this distributed calculator application. I believe the GitHub repo are still around, so you can check out the tweet there if it still exists. It has that link there, and you can check it out. If you already follow Mark, definitely you're already familiar with this, how it all started. So back to minimal API applications. So usually minimal APIs has uses route handlers. So in MVC with controllers way, you also have routes, but this is how you build it. So handlers are actually methods that executes when the route matches. So in the MVC with controllers, we usually if I can still remember, because it's been a while since I used the MVC controller part, but if you create an API, so usually you would add a tag on the top of the method about its route. But for minimal APIs, you would kind of like have this kind of syntax where you are declaring or building the app. You're getting you have these several methods in your map uh, in the route handler. So there's this map. You're mapping your get method, you're mapping your post for that's map post, map put for the put method, and then map delete for mapping the delete, of course. So this is just like an example syntax, and you can also generate expressions like this, like map methods, and follow the syntax based on definition, build it or code it that way, and then you run the app. So in terms going back to route handlers, so this is how you an example of how you would build the route handlers, and it uses lambda expressions, and it can be a local function, and it can be an instance of a method, a static or non-static, and that method or function can be synchronous or asynchronous. So you can actually build that. And in terms of route handlers in minimal API, so as I said, it uses Lambda expression. So this is how the syntax would actually look like. So you're building the app here, and then this is how you would generate your inline lambda. So the line three here, code line three, is this is how you would do it in inline lambda code. And if you're doing a variable, then this is how you would do it. Let's just say variable, and then the name of the variable is handler, and this is how you would declare that handler, considering that it's a string of a type of value. And then you map it, you passed in your variable, which is called handler for this code snippet, and then you run. uh, so another example of route handlers is like local functions. So here the first two lines is generally your declaring or creating, declaring the app. So you're building it, the first two lines. But if you're trying to create route handlers with local functions, so let's just say, let me see, let's just say you declare it, would declare it as a string type, and then your local function, and then of course you do the syntax of a lambda expression, and this is your local function. So you kind of like put the name of your local functions, and in your you can also pass in that function into your get, and then you run it. And then another way is the instance method. So here, the first two lines of the code, example code, is that you're building the app, and then you are creating your instance. It's like, in object-oriented programming, you're creating a new instance of a class. So here you are actually, let's just say you're creating a new instance of your handler that says hello. So what you do is that you create an instance of that, and then you call the method of that class, the method that you have inside that class and instantiate it. And this is what I was referring to. So here you have a class called hello handler, and in the class you have a method which returns a string that says hello instance method, and you can actually call that method by instantiating it within your handlers, pass it on your map get method. And parameter bindings in minimal APIs, it means that it is a process of converting or translating requests, data requests, data requests into parameters that are strongly typed. And they can be expressed by the route handlers. And usually you have a binding source that determines where your parameters are bounded, inbounded from. And they can be inferred based on the HTTP method and the type of parameter, and they can be also explicit. So this is the example of parameter binding in minimal API apps. So let's see, of course, the builder. So you have the builder, you're building your app, you wanna add a service into your app. So you would line two here, you would use builder that services add singleton and then the name of your service, which is actually your service class that you see in here. And then on the line three, you're building, of course, your app. So you kind of like bind your service into the app itself before you build it. And then you would also do some um, mapping with your ID, where you passed in your ID, the page, your whatever header information that you need, your custom. And in your map get method, you're actually passing this required parameters, including your headers, of course. And here you can also pass in your service in that way. So that's a minimal web API. I have a few more examples to show you related to this. So I will show it you when it's time for a demo. But let's proceed to Azure API management. So, so we learned about minimal API. So let's get an overview what Azure API management is. So API management, or APIM, is actually a multi-cloud or hybrid management platforms. It's a managed platform for managing APIs, of course, in Azure, and it supports the complete API lifecycle. It's a platform as a service. It's a part of compute, and it commonly used for integrating with other services as well, such as the apps, Azure App Service, and other tools like monitoring tools like App Insights and identity platforms within Azure, and a lot of things. So, how does API management help developers? Aside from learning about the basics of the complete life cycle of an API, the API management, or the APIM in Azure, actually helps developers building the APIs in abstracting the backend architecture complexity, which can be not easy for API consumers. So you're trying to expose your APIs to your consumers without abstracting those backend architectures. They don't need to know what's going on in your backend code. You just want to expose your APIs to your consumers or users. So the API management also, aside from the management features that it has, it actually helps you host and expose it securely within Azure and also outside Azure as well, like other services. So it has a good integration feature, and it also allows consumers for both internal within your organization or external users. So what are the typical components of API management um, tool in Azure? So typically, what basic ones is that there's the API gateway, there's the management pane, and then the developer portal. There's actually more that you can learn as well, but I won't deep dive in each of them. I can refer you to where you can read more about it, but the API gateway is like it's like the facade of your backend services or your API. So it's like a gateway that where your backend services or app services are being forwarded so that it can get all the requests. So it's like a facade, a gateway, of course. You understand the concept of gateway. So it's like all requests from your backend services gets forwarded to the API gateway, which then process it further to your backend services. You can consider that, let's just say you have a client application and it needs to call some methods from the backend services, so the API gateway can be the gateway or facade between the front end and the back end part of it. And then management pane is actually where providers where you can manage your API providers, so services and other integration like the SDKs, the PowerShell, and the CLI tool as well. So this is where you manage your API and its full life cycle. And then the developer portal, it's actually the portal, of course, for developers where they can develop with the APIs and they can consume it. And it is special with developer portal because this developer portal is not available on consumption type of pricing tier. So I discovered that when I was like testing creating an instance, and then I had the consumption type of tier. There's actually different tiers that I would show you on my demo. So there's the consumption tier, which is the pay per use type of tier, and then there's the standard. There's also the developer. There's premium and other different tiers that you probably need depending on your use case or your type of workloads for APIs. So in terms of integration, the Azure API management integrates pretty well with a lot of Azure services like Azure Key Vault for storing for secrets management, um, and even API. You can use API management for storing uh, secrets and keys, tokens that you need for with your integration. Azure Monitor for monitoring like App Insights, so you can check how are your requests doing in your API manage APIs. You can integrate it with networking services in terms of security over network. So you can have private endpoints to use. You can use application gateway for that, and depending on your preference or networking setup for your organization. So previously, Azure AD, Microsoft Infra ID can be integrated with APM as well. So, like for example, manage identities. You can choose to authenticate uh, the use and access to this resource by controlling or adding this type of managed ID services. Azure Functions for serverless integration. So you can integrate it by calling your serverless functions with API management. Azure Logic Apps, you can integrate it that way. So from Logic App, you can call the API. And then Azure Web Apps. So literally in the app service, you need your backend. You need to have your backend service integrated with API management. Um, so they too kind of connect together, especially if you have a backend code in .NET, like in this example, the minimal API. And then if you want to stream, do some streaming, Azure Event Hubs, streaming of events hubs are actually good, and there's a lot more that's well integrated with this. So API management in Azure are actually pretty big, and most of the services are that can be integrated with it. Of course, there might be limitations, so you need to check the documentation for that to make sure that you're not missing out anything. So this is not a good image. It's a bit blurry, but this is something I borrowed from the Microsoft Learn website. But here you will see from the left to right. So you will see that. So you will see that there is the app developers here, and these are the employees, partners, and consumers who are using apps and devices. So developers access the developer portal, they have their user pane, and then the other component is the management pane where the API is being managed to those that has access for it. And then this is the gateway, the API gateway that I shared earlier as one of the components. So API gateway talks to the backend, uh, um, serves as a facade between your backend services for your applications, and that talks to Azure, where you have your applications deployed in the cloud, and it can be integrated with the app service, the containers. You can integrate it with Azure Functions, Logic Apps, Fabric, and in the API management pane, you can actually develop it with like the CLI SDKs and other supported tools for developers. And the API providers are also on this picture to implement. So there's a lot of other um, services like here, there's the Azure Monitor, the front door. This is the VNet or the networking, the firewall. That is the old icon of Azure AD. It should be the new icon, Intra ID. Key Vault, the event hubs as well for streaming. So let's read some code and show some examples. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna like minimize this one for now. That didn't work. So I'm gonna minimize that. Where is my passport? My passport does. So I'm gonna minimize. Let me see. Where is my, so where is my, so I'm gonna minimize. I'm gonna show you my code. Oh, not that one. Please bear with me. I have lots of things on my desk right now. Okay, let's see that one. All right, let's see. This is dark mode because I like dark. I'm a developer. I hope that you can see this anyway. I will try my best to zoom in. So this is my. I think I've started this project since I got hands-on on this like technology .NET. But this is an example. This is minimal API in .NET. From the beginning, it was actually .NET 6 when I created this example. And then when .NET 7 came, I actually upgraded it to .NET 7. And then I believe .NET 8 preview is coming and supported for ASP.NET Core, but I haven't installed it yet. So what you see right now in the example is only showing .NET 7 as the target one. So in my project, I actually have components. I have a router base, a few example entity class. I just say I have like an order management system, for example, where I have customers, order, and products as a simple one right now. And I have router classes for customers. I have a product router for the consumers. So I did actually like group them. You can design it or organize it as you want, but I liked organizing like the components, entity classes that I have for customers, for example. Basically, there are just um like apps that you see here. Okay. And then you see that, yeah, it's been a while since I coded this one. Okay. Uh, and then the order, the products is just like that. And then the customer router that you see here is actually the router for the customer. So, but before we go there, let me just show you how the starting point of this one. So, basically, if you are in a minimal, I mean, not a non-minimal way of creating API, so you would literally have like MVC controllers here. So you would need to create a controller for the customer, the order, products, and then create the routing for and methods for each each of them. So you see, it's not so much code, and then probably in the program you would have your main function, main that CS method. But here you are actually using the minimalistic way of developing with this. So you're just like directly in the first two lines, you're declaring your the router classes, the components to use method, and then on the first like lines already, I could just like line 4, I could directly say builder. Let's see, wait, I assumed so much. So here you would see like a builder application, and this is where you're actually initializing your web application with all the necessary load, like host and configuration it needs. And then you can choose to like do this first. So you're logging. I need to clear providers and then add the console if I want um, to implement logging. And then if I want to add a container, you would also like there's a recommendation to configure that as well. It's because it supports the Swagger and Open API, and then you can build your services here in line 11. You can build if you want to add the API Explorer, if you want to do Swagger generation, if you want to add course policy, cross origin in your services. And this is on line 16 and 17. This is where I am building my router classes. So here in line 16, I did actually like from my builder build application, I I called the services and I added a scope. I passed in my router for products and customer, which we will look into later. And then I'm building the app. And if I want to use course, I would do that. And then I would like choose the method in this expression if I want to allow or allow any header, any method, allow any credentials, and disallow any credentials and other options as well. So in that method already, you can go in the allow any header. You can also continue with dot. So if you just continue with dot, so aside from allow method, you can actually uh, continue adding more parameters by just putting in dot after the allow header and then select what you want to build for your conditions that's available for you. And then you can set your origins since this is only local, so I have my local host like port numbers. And then in line uh 26, I can choose if I want to use Swagger UI for my development environment, and then you can add more uh, condition on there if else, or you can add more condition depending on what you want to configure for your app per environment. And since this is just development and demo, I only like added is development purpose in here, but you can literally have an else condition where you can like say app environment is staging, is production, or whatever options that you might have in here. But this is development, so you have that, so you can choose how you would want to build it. And in here, this is where I can build or I can choose to do my routing. So I using in here in my line 36 in the using line, I'm creating my scope for my services for the app. And in my services line 39, I am creating the instances of all my services using my router base interface. And then I loop through line 43 to 46. I am looping through each service in my services, and I'm gonna like add uh, the routes that I have for each of those router base classes. And then, of course, in the using method, I would need to make sure that after the for each method, I would also run the app. So in here, you're building it in line 19, but you are adding more configuration, course policy, and other stuff. And you have to make sure that, and of course, that you're running your application. So let's go to how it actually looks when you're building the services, like the routing base, for example. So the router base is actually, it's a class. I said, I think I said interface last time. So excuse me. So that was a routing, a class, not interface. So basically, you have your declarations for like logger. It's just a URL fragment. It's the void method for add routes, and then the application. And then the entity clauses are just like objects, typical classes or parameters. You can build it depending on the data that you want to present for your API, or your database if it's coming from the database. So you're just literally creating the entities or the classes for the objects. And here in the router classes, let's just say customer API, it's actually implementing the router base class. And so here you're actually creating methods in here. So you have, I have a method for for getting all the customers that I have. So what it does, I'm actually lazy to read a database. So what I did is that I hard coded a list of customers and created new ones as an example only. But I could have like read it from a local database. But since it's just demo, it is okay. So when you're trying to get, what it does is, of course, I'm logging the information. So I'm getting the results and calling the method get all. And in my get all, I actually have my list of customers just to like return the data if there's any. And then protected virtual method for get results by ID, where I passed in an integer, which is the ID of my customer, for example, when I call it from the API. And then what it does, it's gonna like, first I need to retrieve in line 74, I need to retrieve the data, all the customer, of course, and I'm gonna use the define method to and find method to filter or to search for the customer ID that matches what was passed on. So if it's not null, of course I return it. Otherwise, I would send a response that to the result that it's not found. And then so on and so forth. I could get the result using by first name. Of course, I need to pass in the string that I'm looking for. It's going to retrieve it again, and then you can do your if else condition if you want. And then you can also do an entity if you're like you're trying to post the method post for the entire object. So you can pass in customer or the entity customer. And then what you would do is you would pass in the entire entity, and then you would kind of like generate new ID. This is just a simple example. So here I just like incremented +1, but you can actually use your GUID methods and whatever way you do to generate ID. And then you can return that you have successfully created this entity or object with this customer ID, for example. And then here is an example of putting. So you're trying to put something. So of course you grab everything, you find that ID that you're trying to update or put method, and then you're gonna update the entity based on the new data that you have passed in. So here in line 131 to 134, you're updating this information with the new one, and then you return the results with the current one that's being updated, and then you do your if conditions. Delete method looks like this without explaining in details, but the most important one is actually here, the method between line 177 to 196, which is actually an override void method for adding the routes for this entity or customer router. So here you're passing in your web application. So we're creating actually the different mapping of methods. So here I have different get methods, of course. So I'm using app map get. This is for my URL fragment to get all the data. This one, the 179, and then the 181. This is the route or the fragment, the URL that I have if I want to get the customer by ID. So I'm gonna need the integer for that. So you use this syntax, which actually translates to what the type of data that it requires to get the customer by ID. And this is also by name. So you see, name is actually a string. So you declare it like this. And then you have a method get by first name that we had earlier of the code. Map pose, you're gonna post the entity, and then the delete. This is how you do your routing, and it's actually the same for the product router. And I have the list, and then of course I can choose whatever method that I want to get, put or delete. The key thing here is the way you do your syntax for what you passed on, like ID, it should be int or a string, whatever like you need to have for your methods. And I want to show you a whole thing about Visual Studio. So there is actually a feature. Probably you have tried it, but there's a feature called Code Map in Visual Studio. So I'm actually using the latest one so far. So I have the Visual Studio Enterprise Edition on my personal computer. And in this version, I don't think this code map feature is available in VS Code, but you can actually create uh, a code for your solution. If you want to see the overview, so you can choose to code map as new, or you can generate it without building. So I will generate it right now without building. And since I was showing you the entire overview of this very simple example or simple solution, I'm just sharing with you how you would generate it in a code map. So after I clicked on generate architecture and then generate code map without some solution without building, I got this a new file called codemap1.ggml. It's not saved yet, but I can choose to save it if I want to. But what I like about it is that uh, it actually uh, shows you different things about how your code is being mapped. By the way, so right now it's very big. Can you zoom to fit? So here it is actually thinking. I think I had one earlier. No, I closed that. So here, yeah. So this is how it generated the code map. So I'm gonna save this later, but you we skipped the build. So inside uh my code, you would actually see that this is how they are associated. So my router class is has association with the API entity class, and in my entity class, I have, of course, those classes, and here you would also see my components in here. So code map is really good. This is just a simple example, but here you would um, go inside of them and can see more about different things, like your program is associated or communicating with that and this and that. So this is really really interesting way to visualize things, especially if you're trying to explain how everything, how your minimal APIs are being built and how they are associated with the entities. And it is a good way also for fellow developers to be associated in what you are trying to build. Visualization is also is always good if you're trying um to explain what you just coded and how you structured your API to others. So it's easier to explain. Of course, we want to explain our by code, but sometimes we would want to see it visually, especially if you're trying to explain it to like a system architect or somebody that needs visualization. Okay, so that's the simple example. So I'm gonna run this code. Let's see. It's almost 1 hour. It looks like I promised you it will only take 40 minutes, but it looks like I had fun showing you the code. But I have a few more. I'm just gonna run this locally. This is to show you how this app would look like locally on my local host. So while this app is running on my Visual Studio, so you see it's actually running uh, behind the scenes. So on my Visual Studio, as you can see, there's the .NET minimal API demo. This is the version that I have. So you can actually define your versions, but these are the routers that I've created and the schemas as well. So I have my methods, get posts, several gets because I have the get that gets all the customers by ID, by name. I have the put and the delete, and also the same way for the products. So let's just say if I want to get the customer method, I can actually try it using Swagger, of course. And here I would see the results. I'm getting a response of 200, and then in a JSON format, you would see the data that the response body with all the list of um, customers that I want to see or show in my application. And then if I want to get a customer by ID, of course, it is required to get the customer by ID so you can try it out. You get the ID of two, you execute, and then you will get the customer with ID number two. First name Keith Harris, and he works with the company called Progressive Sports, and that's his email. And same way, if you want to update, you try it out. So you know the basics. So if depending on what kind of operations that you're doing, you can play around with it in your local host. So that's the local running development version or code. So here, my code map is also pretty cool right now. So it's showing the map that I want to see, and then you can actually design it as as you want, and then see what this is what I was trying to show. So I have the program main, and it has my entity classes has this, my router classes definitely has this one. So the code map is really good. You can even go to the external part, which has other components, and you can look into what's tree diagram of that. So I will stop that. That's Visual Studio. So I will go to Azure. So I want to first, before we publish this one, I want to show you how it looks if you're just getting started and you're trying to create a new API. So I have the resource group already dedicated for the demo. It was .NET 6 when I created this resource group. But let's just say you want to create the Azure API management. I'm doing the lazy way of creating it in the management portal, but there are different ways for you to create API management service. So, of course, if you're doing infrastructure as code or automation, you can create uh, the infrastructure using Azure RM module in Terraform. So you just have to make sure you have the latest version. And then these are like the modules or the resources that you would need. A few examples on the documentation and how you would build it using Terraform. And if you want to build it using I believe if you're using it with Bicep, if you're doing it with Bicep, so you would have this syntax as well for the API documentation. You would do this this way, and then you would deploy it using the CLI or PowerShell. And then you can use the template, the portal, PowerShell. But today we are almost out of time. So I'm just going to show you briefly how you would create it manually using click, click, click. so, so this is my resource group for the demo. So you would give it a resource name. So I use the prefix API APIM, like Azure Back to School 2023, and then my region, which is East US. And then for my organization, I can write Jonah Andersson Tech Company. And then my email address is actually Jonah at Jonah Andersson Tech. And then here is what I was trying to show you. So there's an option. So in my demo, for my minimal API, I use the consumption one. Uh, but there are other features like other tiers, like the basic, developer, standard, and premium. The reason why I'm showing this to you, because if you use consumption, you won't be able to see the developer portal. But developer standard, premium, and I believe the basic actually has the developer profile. So the developer one doesn't have SLA, but if you're doing it for production, it would be good to probably use the standard or the premium one. So I'm going to use the developer. Can enable App Insight if I want. I can choose whatever instance that I currently have. You can actually uh, choose to scale, but then it's not supported on the developer like tiers. So if you want to scale, you would have to standard and then premium if you want to have that scaling. So I think I would like that. So I would go back and go to standard, go to monitoring, activate the app insights. So here you can choose your scaling. So the service unit uh, that actually scales up and down depending on your API traffic. And instead of you upgrading your tier from standard to premium one, you don't need to kind of like manually do that. Your scaling setup or configuration already does that. Of course, there's a disclaimer here. If you increase your units, you additional charges will be incurred. And then the good thing about this is that you can integrate manage identities in here as well. I won't do that yet. And then in terms of networking security, you can choose to none or set up your private endpoint in your internal organization network so that this API can be restricted to within your intranet or network, or how you would want to expose it to public. And then in terms of protocol, you can choose this protocol settings for the API. So if you have a specific requirements for transport security protocols, both on the client side and the backend side, even in HTTP part and Cipher part, you can choose any of those and then add tags for like cost management and other monitoring that you need to do, and then you create it. So it only takes a few minutes to create one in Azure portal. Probably is quicker as well if you're going to do it by automation or CLI. But that is how you would create it. So going back, so I did deploy that code that I had showed you on my Visual Studio. And I did deploy it. So when you deploy it, it actually uh, gets deployed to an app service. So let me see. It didn't activate my Azure Mass. It did. Why is okay? Yes, I was trying to hide my subscription ID. Let's see. Okay, let me see. But it's okay. All right. Shimmer's. Okay. So there is this um extension that actually hides subscription ID for your tenant. It seems like it's not working right now. It's okay. So what I was trying to show you is that when I publish that .NET application, it goes to like an app service. So it's been deployed, but if you go to that domain, it is actually not working because this one is being used as a backend service for the API. So this is integrated with API management. So from the Azure Web App options itself, you can go directly and check on the APIs that you have created for the application. And in that minimal API project, I did have these methods that I did run locally. But if I want to go into details about how API management service looks like, the overview looks like this. So you see, I have this gateway URL. So usually you get the name of your service that you have when you created this and published it, and then your gateway URL dot Azure dash API dot net. So that's the one. The tier that I have is consumption, so I won't be able to see some features like standard and premium has, like developer portals. So I won't be able to show that to you right now. But in terms of like APIs itself, it has the option for APIs that I created. You can set up products, subscriptions, backend, some tags, schema, authorization. You can integrate it with Power Platform, App Insights, manage identities, certificates, and other protocols. But this is my API for one app only. You can have as many API here, and in each API, you have your different methods. So um, I do have, you can also do versioning actually. So I have like versions from July, and then I also have versions from today. So you can actually test your API methods based on your version, however you configured it. And then In the API management service, you do have your front end if you had that, but I didn't have that. So what you would do to actually test it is that instead of doing it in Postman, you can do it within the API management in Azure. So there's an API management console where you can add your parameters if you have that. This is the gateway URL, of course. Headers, if you want to add that, just like how you would work in Postman locally or online. And then this is the request URL, which is the gateway slash customer, that was my formatting. And then the HTTP requests, and I can choose if I want to do bypass course proxy, trace it. But this time, just for testing, I'm going to do some testing. And based on the response, the message body actually returned HTTP response 200 OK, which is green. And then it has the dates, whatever I need. And then it did return to me the list of customers for that method or get call. If I also want to get customer by ID, of course, you would need to add your parameters. So let's just say you want to add two. This is how exactly how we did test it locally using Swagger. Locally, you can pass in whatever query headers. This is your URL. So if I passed in customer slash, I want ID number two, this request URL. It looks like my tests on the Azure portal itself actually returned 200 uh, with that customer number two, which is Keith Harris again. And then if you want to trace, uh, you would have to configure it a bit more on your API, but otherwise, that's it. This is how you work with API management on Azure with that minimal project API project deployed to Azure. So going back, I want to share with you about like different examples. So if you Google, there's actually a tutorial in creating a minimal API in Microsoft Learn. There's a good code example from in Code Magazine as well. There's a good blog by let's see Andrew Locke at the .NET Escapade uh, website or blog. So I did see that. I did bookmark actually. It's a good one. And of course, the Microsoft Learn documentation is always the good source of updated information. So you actually have the tutorial here for importing your first API, creating and publishing, mocking your API, transforming, so on and so forth. And then um, community leaders like others that works for Microsoft like David Fowl, they also have good documentation on their GitHub um, about minimal APIs, like how you would create an application, how you would change your port for your local host, if you want to use multiple ports, for example, if you want to read ports from respective environments, uh, and if you want to listen to different interfaces and other configuration, that's really cool. So I would actually save that. And then there's also this GitHub repo by contributors. It's actually David Fowler also and Damian Edwards. The community where they share minimal API playground. This is like different projects. They have a to-do app for To-Do Dapper, EF Core. and other examples. So this is a good one, Minimal API Playground. And then Scott Hanselman, I believe in 2011, also wrote an article or blog about this, the .NET 6 Minimal API, but he did highlight about uh, unit tests focus and how it would be tested. So here he did wrote examples and how to test it, unit test your minimal API. So Scott is a great guy. So we spoke in the same conference earlier this year at .NET Castle in Orebro. So it was good. So I'm a big fan of his blog. And this is also worth checking out if you're curious about testing. So, in terms of DevOps, publishing the API, everything you can integrate with it. And there's also a learning path for that. So, feel free to check it out. So, going back to my presentation again, let's see. And where is my presentation? I think I closed my presentation. All right. Let me just go back and see if I could find my presentation. Okay. So here it is. So I will continue from the current slide. So, those were the examples that I have. If you want to see my code example on GitHub in details, so you can scan this code, QR code, or go to my GitHub / Jonah Andersson. You will see one of my repos, public repos, has this example. And now I've been talking like for over an hour, and you are saying, "Oh, Jonah, there's too much to learn about this. There's so many great things, just like Yoda said. But I cannot like spoon feed you all the learning that you need. Of course, there's a lot to learn. I tried to give you the comprehensive overview of the minimal APIs and API management. There's a lot to share with you, but 1 hour is not enough. I won't be able to do that. But my advice is to learn by doing, and this is an example of an image that a picture that I had from several years ago when I was teaching programming to kids in schools. And I really taught my students to not just code, understand their code and learn from it, but also to share their code to others. Because the more you do hands on to it and then you share it with others, with your friends or your pair programming buddy, then the more you learn as well. And of course, if you're a beginner and had no idea about APIs talk that I've been sharing, if you're very new to this technology, I would recommend you reading this free ebook from Azure. It's called API Design. It's a several pages book that I've read myself. It's a very good basics about learning how API works with application developments. And Microsoft Learn, get updated. Don't miss what's new. So there are things or updates that can happen all the time. So the documentation is always the source of truth, and there are good examples, tutorials, and learning path there. And QR code again, if you're interested with QR codes. So, and then if you're interested to learn more about compute services aside from Azure API management, there are more to learn about Azure. And if you're curious, of course, you can go to Microsoft Learn. But if you're curious about what I wrote in my book about these topics and how you can get started with cloud and development with Azure, Feel free to scan the QR code to get the online complimentary access and learn more about the book. If you want to wait for the paper copy, you can also do that. So we are running out of time. We are so little time and so much to learn, as Yoda said. But you know what he said as well? Perseverance. So either you do or do not. If you don't do it, there is no try. So thank you so much for tuning in to my session today about minimal web APIs in .NET and Azure API management. I hope that you enjoyed my session and learned something. If you have questions, feedback, or whatever, feel free to connect with me by scanning this QR code. I am on Twitter X at CJ Codere as my ID, and you will find me on LinkedIn using my name, Jonah Andersson. And if you found this session useful, feel free to tweet or share about this session to your colleagues or friends and mention me and use the hashtag Asher Back to School. And thank you so much for your time today. And I hope that you have a great day or great evening and enjoy the rest of the upcoming sessions for the next days this December. I mean, this September. I'm sorry. And yeah, see you in my next one, which is about Azure Developer CLI. That's also a fun thing to share about. So thank you and have a great, awesome day. See you next time.